The story you're about to hear is called The Gift of the Magi. The author's name is O. Henry. More on that later. The gift she'd chosen was perfect. It was made for Jim and no one else. $1.87, that was all, and 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved one and two at a time. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. That was all she had. And the next day would be Christmas. There was just one thing to do, so Della did it. She threw herself down on the shabby old couch. She began to cry. After all, life is made up of smiles and tears, but mostly tears. While Della is sobbing away, take a look around. A furnished apartment at $8 a week. It's not very fancy, not fancy at all. Have a look in the hall. There's a letterbox, too small for letters. Also a doorbell that doesn't ring, and a card with the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. James Dillingham Young. That's a rich sounding name for a very poor man. And anyhow, he was always called Jim by Mrs. James Dillingham Young. You already know her as Della, which is all to the good. Della finished her cry. Then she carefully powdered her cheeks. She walked to the window and looked out. She saw a gray cat walking on a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months. But Jim made just $20 a week, and that doesn't go far. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. She had spent many happy hours planning something nice for him, something fine and rare and wonderful, worthy of being owned by Jim. Suddenly, she turned from the window. In a moment, she stood before the mirror. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face was pale. She was looking at her hair. Now, there were two things Jim and Della took special pride in. These were their treasures. One was Jim's gold watch. It had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. It was long and flowing. Quickly, she pulled down her hair. She let it fall its full length. Down it rippled, shining and glowing like waves of brown waters. It reached below her knees. Della took a long look at her hair. Her eyes still sparkled, but tears were forming at the edges. A drop or two splashed on the worn red carpet. Then, with shaking fingers, Della put up her hair again. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. Out the door she hurried. Down the stairs she went to the street. She stopped in front of a sign that read, Madame Sofroni, hair bought and sold. Della ran up one flight. She caught her breath as Madame Sofroni greeted her. Will you buy my hair? She asked. Yes, said Madame. I buy hair for wigs. Take off your hat and let's have a look. Down rippled Della's beautiful hair. $20, said Madame. I'll take it, said Della. Della spent the next 2 hours shopping for a present for Jim. Finally, she found it. It was perfect. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any other store, and she had looked through them all. It was a watch chain made of platinum. Its design was simple and pure. It was even worthy of the watch, as Della saw it. She knew that it must be Jim's. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the chain and the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim could look at the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly. That was because he was a little ashamed of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della got home, her excitement soon gave way to reason. She sat in front of the mirror and tried to fix up her hair. It was so short. It took her 40 minutes, and she did her best. When she was finished, her head was covered with tiny, close lying curls. She frowned. She thought she looked a little like a schoolboy. Jim will kill me, she said to herself. He'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. She shook her head sadly. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made. The frying pan was on the back of the stove. It was hot and ready to cook the pork chops. Jim was never late. Della waited eagerly. She held the watch chain in her hand and stared at the door. Then she heard his step on the stairs. For a moment, she turned pale. Please, God, she whispered, make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened. Jim stepped in and closed the door behind him. He looked thin and serious and about 22. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped in the hallway. His eyes were fixed on Della. He was staring at her. There was a strange look on his face, one she had never seen before. It was not anger, nor horror, nor surprise. He just stared at her with that funny look on his face. Jim, darling, she cried, don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it. I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful gift I've got for you. You've cut off your hair, asked Jim slowly. It was as though he could not believe the fact. Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm still me without my hair. Jim looked about the room. You say your hair is gone? He said blankly. You needn't look for it, said Della. It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone. It's Christmas Eve, Jim. Be good to me. I did it for you. She looked into his eyes. Maybe the hairs on my head were numbered, she said softly, but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim? Jim seemed to wake out of his trance. He put his arms around Della. Dear reader, for 10 seconds, let us look the other way. At the same time, remember this. The Magi brought valuable gifts. A word about this later. Jim took a package from his overcoat pocket. He threw it on the table. Don't make a mistake, Della, he said. There's nothing in the way of a haircut that could make me like my girl any less. But just unwrap that package. You'll see why you had me going for a while. Della's fingers quickly tore at the paper and string. There was a great scream of joy and then, alas, a flood of tears. For there lay the combs, the set of combs she had wanted for so long. She had seen them in a store window on Broadway. They were beautiful combs made of shell with jeweled rims, the kind of combs you wear in your hair, and now they were hers. But the hair which she would have worn them was gone. Still, she hugged them to her heart. Finally, she was able to look up. With dim eyes and a smile, she said, My hair grows so fast, Jim. And then Della leaped up. Oh, she cried, oh! Jim had not seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him and opened her hand. The metal glistened brightly. Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on you. But Jim did not obey. Instead, he tumbled down on the couch. He clasped his hands behind his head and smiled. Dell, he said, let's put our Christmas presents away. Let's keep them for a while. They're too nice to use just now. There was a pause. Then he added, I sold the watch. to get money to buy your combs. The Magi, as you know, were wise men. They were wonderfully wise men. They brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts must have been wise ones. Here is a word to the wise of these days. Remember Della and Jim. For of all those who give gifts, these two were the wisest. All of who receive gifts, they are the wisest. Everywhere, those who give with their hearts, they are the wisest. They are the Magi. Just a quick word about the author. O. Henry was the pen name of William Sidney Porter. He is among America's best-known short story writers. O. Henry's first stories were written in an Ohio prison where he was serving a 3-year term for stealing bank funds. It is not clear if O. Henry was actually guilty, but he was a suspect, and in a moment of panic, he fled the country. When he returned, he was arrested. It is said that he took his pen name from a prison guard. After his release from prison, O. Henry went to New York. He worked as a short story writer for a newspaper. He wrote more than 100 stories in only 2.5 years. O. Henry was a master of the surprise ending, which made him famous. He wrote hundreds of stories, 12 volumes in all. The Gift of the Magi was the most popular.